The reading is Hebrews chapter 2. And we're going to be starting at verse 5. I'll just give you a moment to find it. It is not to angels that he has subjected the world to come, about which we are speaking. But there is a place where someone has testified, "What is mankind that you are mindful of them? A son of man that you care for him? You made them a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor and put everything under their feet." In putting everything under them, God left nothing that is not subject to them. Yet, at present, we do not see everything subject to them. But we do see Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. In bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. He says, "I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly, I will sing your praises." And again, "I will put my trust in him." And again, he says, "Here am I and the children God has given me." Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death.
Thank you, Evie. What I said earlier on that we're very pleased to welcome today Professor John Wyatt. John, come and join me. We're going to be hearing from John in just a moment. I'll introduce him. We were also going to be hearing from our own Mark Banting, who is a consultant of palliative care at the hospital just down the road here. Mark is down in isolating at the moment with his family. It's been a story for the last 18 months. Somebody's always doing that. It's his turn just this week. So we're going to be hearing from him via the wonders of technology a little bit later on. But mostly we're here to hear from you, John. John, your background is as a doctor. You are a baby doctor, a neonatologist. I think you were in charge of intensive care for young children.
That's right, yes. Right? Yes, in central London at UCH, University College Hospital.
Fantastic. You're a research scientist as well. You've done had multiple tracks to your career, but in recent years, you've been giving more and more time to helping Christians think through the impact of their faith on a changing world, trying to work out the interface between biblical conviction and the advances in medical science and technology and indeed law. You've authored a number of books. Some of them are on the table just over there, Connect Corner. I've got a note of Matters of Life and Death, Right to Die, Dying Well, and The Robot Will See You Now, which is a great title. Some of you will remember John's last visit to Southampton, or at least to Christchurch, 3 years ago, when he addressed us for a Connect Plus evening on the subject of artificial intelligence and a guide to how Christians might engage with that rapidly changing area. We're very grateful to you for your visit today. I'm going to pray for you and then hand over to you. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your word. Thank you that it's sufficient to equip us for every part of our life and of our thought. We thank you particularly, Father, for the resource you've given to Christian people of teachers and others who are able to reflect upon your word and apply it to a changing world. Thank you for John, for his experience, for his passion to communicate something of that experience, for his thoughtfulness about the issues that are involved, that are changing all the time. I pray now that you'd use him to serve us well. Would you give him clear conviction, clarity? Would you give us listening ears? Would you prepare us for decisions we might have to make in the future, or even closer at hand, and ways in which we need to be thinking now in the light of the changing world around us. For Jesus' sake, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much indeed, Orlando, and it's great to be here and have this privilege of sharing this time with you. I had the privilege as a young man of being very influenced by John Stott, who was the rector at All Souls and who became a personal friend. And it was his vision of what he called double listening, which has really sort of transformed my life and has been a sort of focus of my life really ever since. So both trying to listen to the word, the unchanging truth of God, but at the same time listening to the modern world with all the challenges and questions and problems that it's raising, and then trying to connect, to build a bridge between these two worlds. So we're not talking about robots today. In fact, I'm afraid it's going to be a rather grisly session. We're going to be talking about death, dying, suicide, killing, suffering, pain. It's going to be a bundle of laughs. But I hope as well we can see the wonderful power of Christian truth and the way that Christian people and others have been able to respond positively to the challenges we face. So, a Christian take on assisted suicide. And I haven't time to unpick that wonderful passage in Hebrews, but I hope you saw at the end there, it's the basic message of the passage was that Jesus took on flesh and blood and took on death in order to provide freedom for those who, through fear of death, were in lifelong bondage. And the one thing we know, and public polls have shown that, is that people are basically terrified about death and dying. And it's fear that is driving most of what we hear and what I'll be talking about. And of course, those fears are not just out there in society as a whole, they're also in here. Because if we're honest, many of us have had the experience of watching other people die, and there could well be people here, I'm very aware, who may, during the pandemic, have seen a loved one die or face death. And I myself, a very close friend, and others have died during the pandemic of COVID. And so COVID has brought death very much home to most of us. And if we're honest, many of us, the prospect of death and what might happen, how might I die, and what would it be like if I caught COVID and was in an ITU and so on. So these fears are very real, and we need to look at them. And as we said, but we need to understand the root of that fear. Where does that fear come from? And it's the evil one. The power of death is held by the evil one. And it's Jesus who has then taken on the enemy in the cross, and through that, he's freed those who all their lives were held in slavery by the fear of death. And we've been hearing a lot of tragic stories in the media and elsewhere, and particularly in the recent debate, which I'm going to mention in the House of Lords, we heard a constant stream of terrible, tragic stories. And I'm just going to highlight two of them, but there are many others that you could point out. So this is the story of Daniel James. He was a very promising young rugby player, played for the junior England team, and then was in a horrible accident on the rugby field, fractured his cervical spine, paralyzed from the shoulders downwards, and he became deeply depressed. He was a very sporty guy, and he decided he tried to kill himself, and his parents tried to chivvy him along, and they bought him home gym equipment and so on. His first attempt at suicide was unsuccessful. And then he said to them, if you really love me, you'll help me to kill myself. And eventually they went with him to the Dignitas clinic in Switzerland, where he was given lethal medicine and he died. And the coverage of the media in general was very positive. You know, what noble parents that they didn't put their own concerns first. They did the best for their son. And why on earth did he have to travel to Switzerland? Why couldn't it have happened here? And then here's another story. Called Jeff Spector. He was the guy in the white shirt on the right, self-made businessman, pretty successful, living his life. And then he was diagnosed with an inoperable tumor of the spine, and it was growing and pressing on the spinal cord. And he was told that he was going to become paralyzed and incontinent because of the untreatable cancer. And he said, absolutely no way, Jose. That's not me, that's not my life. And so he called all his friends together. They had this celebration meal, and he told them that he was traveling to Dignitas and he was going to kill himself. And they tried to talk him out of it, but he went and did it. And again, the coverage of the media, by and large, was how positive this is. Why did he have to travel to Switzerland? And surely we should change the law to allow people like this to kill themselves. But of course, there are lots of other forces behind this. When these new legislation is presented in Parliament, it's always described as a very limited act. It's only about this small group of people who want to kill themselves. But it would be totally naive not to see the wider social context of all this. And that is, of course, that we have a rapidly aging population. We have a rise in the number of people with Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative conditions. We've got rising healthcare costs and people questioning how is the NHS going to cope with all the care costs for these number of elderly people. We've got family breakup, people living alone. We've got increased demand on social care and so on. And although it isn't talked about much in public, in private, people say, actually, the only solution we can see is to legalize some kind of assisted suicide, and then, we will encourage people at the end of life, when to do the decent thing and do the best thing for the country, which is to end their lives. And so the campaigners for changing the law is a very well-funded and very effective lobby group. They have a turnover of £2 million a year or more. They used to be called the Voluntary Euthanasia Society, but they changed their name to Dignity in Dying. And the very name change tells you, that they've become much more sophisticated, and they have decided to call what they're pushing for assisted dying. And you might well ask, why have people who make their career in the very precise, because some of these are very senior lawyers, they make their career in the very precise and forensic use of language. Why have they chosen this particular ambiguous and euphemistic phrase, assisted dying, to refer to something which is actually a serious criminal offense? It's assisting a suicide, assisting someone to end their life, which currently is a serious criminal offense and can have you, I think, 14 years in prison. Although suicide itself is not a criminal offense, assisting a suicide is. And so there has been this massive media campaign and public polls which suggest that 70 to 80% of the British public are in favour of assisted dying in polls. When you actually dig down and say, do they understand what assisted dying means? Of course, that's something rather different, but nonetheless, this wave of pressure. And so a bill has been introduced into the House of Parliament. It's being supported by media journalists, by the BBC and so on. Although they claim to be neutral, it's pretty clear that a lot of the publicity is slanted towards these very tragic cases and the support of this bill. And just on 22nd of October, just a week ago, This bill was debated in the House of Lords, the so-called assisted dying bill. 130 lords spoke in the debate, and I have to say it was an extremely high-quality debate. One of the fascinating things about the House of Parliament is both the Commons and the Lords are capable, once you take away party politics, both the Lords and the Commons are capable of having very high quality, very well informed and very respectful debates. Sadly, we very rarely see it because most of the time the debates held in Parliament are all to do with party politics, and so we get all the yah-boo sucks. And it's really, I think, tragic that the ability of the often very well-informed people to have a serious debate just is lost because of party politics. But anyway, they had a very good debate, and I'm glad to say that they talked about the number of people who'd been written in and produced material and expressed their opinion to the Lords. And I myself collaborated with CARE, the Christian charity, and was able to write a detailed report about arguing against this change in law, and it was sent to 500 members of the House of Lords, which was, it just shows you again, in a democratic society, we do have the opportunity of actually influencing this debate if we're only prepared to take those opportunities. So what is the bill about? Well, this is in essence what was being proposed in Parliament, that if you met these 4 criteria, you could be given lethal medication designed to kill you immediately and cleanly. What criteria did you have to meet? Well, the law said these were the 4 things. You had to be 18 or over. You had to have a, quote, settled and uncoerced will to kill yourself. You had to have a terminal illness with a life expectancy of less than 6 months. And you had to have legal capacity, which means you had to be legally capable and responsible of taking an important decision about yourself. And if you met those 4 criteria, 2 doctors agreed, would have to be confirmed by a High Court judge, and you would then be given this lethal concoction of medicines, which is designed to kill you instantaneously and cleanly. But you yourself have to take the drug. The doctor is not allowed to give the final injection, although interestingly, the doctor can draw up the drugs, can make them available, can explain to you how to take them, can even, in people who have difficulty in swallowing, can put in an intravenous line, can rig up an infusion device, and in the end, you have to press the button or you have to take the action to kill yourself. And it doesn't take a legal genius to realize, just looking at that, all the kinds of problems and legal loopholes which could easily develop. So 18, why 18? What about 17-year-olds who have a terminal illness? And we already know in other jurisdictions that so-called mature minors, which is people right down to 13, 12 or younger with terminal illnesses, have received euthanasia. What about a settled and uncoerced will? Can 2 busy doctors ever be really confident to know whether you are being subject to subtle emotional pressure by relatives or other people who are keen to get hold of the money, and you're burning up the value of the house, well, your complicated care, and if you would only end your life, or there's an insurance policy, if only we can get you to die before 75, we get the payout and all the rest. So how is that? That may sound very cynical, but I'm afraid in the real world in which doctors like me work, we actually see those kind of things not uncommonly. Life expectancy of less than 6 months, well, anybody who's a doctor knows that our ability to predict life expectancy is completely hopeless. I mean, the truth is, when we are predicting how long somebody is going to live, we often get it wrong. And I personally have often got it catastrophically wrong in predicting how long somebody's going to live or die. So the idea that doctors are able to predict very precisely whether someone has 6 months to live. What happens when we thought you had cancer and actually the diagnosis was wrong and it was some rare other condition? Nobody will ever know that actually you were going to get better because we killed you. Sorry about that, but self-fulfilling prophecy. And then what about legally defined capacity? Well, what about people who have depression? It's very well known that one of the cardinal signs of depression is suicidal thoughts, the desire to kill yourself. And people with terminal illness are frequently depressed. And so is it possible to unpick whether this is a rational desire to end your life or whether it's being influenced by depression and so on? So there are all kinds of practical problems with legislation like this. But nonetheless, that was the bill. It's continuing to go through Parliament. And about approximately equal numbers of peers on both sides voted in favour, argued in favour, and argued against. It's now got into what's called the committee stage. At the moment, the government is saying they're not actively backing it, but I think the pressure, if this bill continues to go through, and particularly if it starts in the Commons as well, there will be an enormous amount of pressure on the government to say, well, look, 80% of the population want this. You really need to allow it to come into force. So this is H.L. Mencken, American journalist. There's always an easy solution to every human problem. Neat, plausible, and wrong. And that's exactly the case for assisted suicide and euthanasia. It seems so neat. It seems so plausible. It seems so obvious. And yet it's wrong. And so in the remainder of the talk, I'm going to try to unpick why, as a Christian, I and most of us think it's wrong. And to begin with, we need to think about language. I like this proverb. The beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper names. So it's very, very interesting that in the history of medical ethics, it's often the manipulation of language which precedes the change in behavior. And right from the very beginning, mercy killing was called euthanatos, which literally means good death. Euthanasia. And time again, there have been these slippery euphemisms about choice and control at the end of life, easing the passing and so on, to describe something which is either intentional killing, homicide against the Homicide Act, or it is assisting a suicide, again, a serious criminal offence. So the battle about language is really important. And if you know anything about the Bible, you shouldn't be too surprised that because we see this in the Bible. If you know your Bibles, you will know that the very first thing that the evil one says in the Bible is, did God really say? In other words, it's an attack on language. It's an attack on words. And words matter. The words we use to describe our actions and the actions of others matter. So here, what do we mean? Euthanasia actually means intentional medical killing. It is to introduce death where death wasn't, in somebody who is not dying. It is to kill them. And it is to use lethal drugs which are designed to kill rapidly and instantaneously. And it's very important to understand that the drugs that the euthanasia doctors use are completely different from the drugs that the rest of us use in normal medicine and which are used in palliative care. Because in palliative care, the aim is not to kill. The aim is actually to allow death to occur naturally while you treat the symptoms. But here, when we're talking about both euthanasia and assisted suicide, we're talking about drugs which have been carefully selected to be lethal immediately and cleanly. It's very much an execution. Medically assisted suicide is intentional medical killing. The intention of the doctor is that the patient will die. The doctor calculates the lethal dose, makes them available, explains to the patient how to take them, what's the maximum effective way so that they will kill themselves. But the doctor hangs back from the final act. But it's still intentional killing. And it is the intention to bring death. And euthanasia is not the same as withholding or withdrawing medical treatment, which is futile or burdensome, which is bringing no benefit. Stopping medical treatment in somebody who may well be dying is not intentional killing. It's good medical practice. It's what doctors have always done. And there's a great deal of confusion about this. Some people who say, oh, we need assisted dying, it's because they think there has to be a law to stop doctors just giving normal treatment in people who are dying. But that's not the case. Doctors, in conjunction with the people themselves and with relatives, are perfectly at will to stop treatment that's bringing no benefit. And what we have to do is we constantly have to balance the benefits and the burdens of treatment. And treatment that is bringing no benefit should be stopped. But that is not the same as killing, as introducing death where death isn't there. So thinking about this from a Christian point of view, and I think this is, if you don't remember anything else, perhaps you could try and remember this. Christian ethics comes from Christian anthropology. In other words, the way we are called to treat one another comes from the way we are made, from the way God has created us. And so understanding more about what it means to be human and about the way that God has created us helps us to understand how we should treat one another. And in Christian thinking, we know that human beings are made in God's image. They are unique in the entire cosmos, that only human beings, as far as we know, are made in God's image. And what this means, what the Bible teaches us, is that our life, your life, my life, is not just a gift from God. It is that, but it's something even more wonderful. It is a reflection of God himself. And therefore, to end that life is in some way an offense against God himself. And where do we see this? Well, early on in Genesis, we get this verse, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. So this is capital punishment for homicide. Why is that death penalty said? What is the reason? Because for in the image of God has God made man. So the intentional destruction of another human life is, to put it in violent language, it is to spit in the face of the Almighty. It is to take his most precious, wonderful being and to desecrate it, to destroy it. That's why, you sometimes say, well, if it was a dog, he'd be put out of his misery. Why can't you put human beings out of their misery? Precisely because it isn't a dog. It's a wonderful, godlike being that is reflecting the very being of God himself. So in Christian thinking, the destruction of an innocent human life is always wrong, not only because of the wrong to the individual and the community, but also because it's a profound insult to the being and character of God himself. And Gilbert Mylander, theologian, put it well when he said, within the story of my life, I have the relative freedom of a creature, but it is not simply my life to do with as I please. Suicide expresses a desire to be free and not also finite, a desire to be more like the creator than the creature. Because we are created beings and because we're locked into a community, we are not free to do whatever we like with our own lives. And in particular, we are not free to destroy it. But not only that, so often people at the end of life say, I just don't want to be a burden to anyone. It's the fear of dependence, fear of being a burden, which drives many people to want to kill themselves. And yet, what Christianity has to say is something very countercultural. It's to say that dependence is not something alien and dehumanizing and terrible. No, it is part of the narrative of every human life. You came into this world utterly and totally dependent on the love and care of other people. You go through a phase in your life when other people depend on you, and you and I, most of us, are going to end our lives utterly and totally dependent on the love and care of others. And that isn't something terrible and evil. That is the way that God made us. And that's why the Apostle Paul says, bear one another's burdens, carry one another's burdens, and you will fulfill the law of Christ. And it's interesting that in the Bible and in all cultures influenced by Christianity, suicide is never glorified as a noble or honorable way to die. It is in many pagan cultures, but in all cultures influenced by Christianity and in the Bible, suicide is seen as an act of despair and hopelessness. Think about King Saul or Judas Iscariot Suicide in the Bible is never seen as a godly, as a responsible way to die. And so self-destruction is a harm to be avoided and resisted. It's not something to be welcomed and facilitated. And so there's this very curious Christian thinking about death. On the one hand, death is an enemy, and we fight against death. And we do everything we can to hold it at bay. And in my medical career, and there are many medics here, we constantly battle against death. We try to hold it away. And yet, there comes a point in many people's lives at which the right thing to do is to take away our hands and allow death to occur. So death can turn from being an enemy into being a strange kind of healing, a severe mercy, a way into a gateway to a new reality. So if suicide and helping people kill themselves is wrong, what is the Christian response? You know, whenever we say that something is wrong from a Christian point of view, we must immediately go on and say, and here is a better way. Here is a better option. Is there a better option? Well, yes, wonderfully there is. And to a large extent, at least humanly speaking, it's because of this amazing woman called Cicely Saunders, who was a Christian doctor in the 50s and the 60s. And she invented a new way of caring for dying people. And she and a group of pioneers invented palliative care. And it's gone around the world. It's still true that the UK are the world leaders of palliative care. And just some years ago, I happened to be at a reception, and I was sitting next door to a very eminent medical lord, a member of the House of Lords, who had chaired a committee to see whether euthanasia should be legalised in the UK, a previous, in the 1990s. And I asked him, I said, why did he think that euthanasia was legalised in the Netherlands? From the 60s and 70s it was taking off, but it never took off in the UK. Why was that? And he said, oh, that's very simple. I can answer that. Yes, 2 words, Cicely Saunders. He wasn't a Christian. He personally was said to be rather in favour of euthanasia, but it was just showed you how the impact, how a Christian witness and the impact of a single life could have such an impact across the world. And so she invented this specialty of palliative care. She said, you matter because you are you, and you matter to the end of your life. Not only will we help you to die well, but we'll help you to live before you die, to live until you die. That became one of the slogans of the positive, seeing that death, dying, didn't have to be something very negative. Actually, it could even be an opportunity for internal healing. You don't have to kill the patient in order to kill the pain. So we're going to have an interview now with Mike Banting, who's a palliative care physician, who's going to tell us a little more about what practically palliative care involves.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're really grateful for you for making this time, and we do appreciate that it must not be all that much fun being housebound at the moment. It's a great opportunity we've got, though, to talk about what's an enormous issue and something that you have particular interest in. You are a consultant for palliative care at the General, just down the road here, and therefore you are dealing with the issues that we have been talking about every day, I suppose, to some degree. I want to start, though, with asking you about your responses to perhaps what you might have heard in the House of Lords the other day. Last week, they were debating changing the assisted suicide law, and all sorts of stories were being told of people who'd had harrowing experiences of great suffering, people close to the end of their lives, wishing for some relief. What would you say to those people? What would you say in response to those stories?
Thank you. I think my first response to those people would be compassion. Is that these are people made in God's image who have experienced suffering, whether that be physical suffering with symptoms like pain, whether it be emotional, whether it be psychological suffering. And equally, these are people who are or have lost control. So I think my first and overarching thought and response would be one of compassion. But also, I think it would be to phrase the whole question within a context of a world that's ignoring God. And actually, when you take God out of the picture, these stories become more harrowing and more distressing because this life is all there is, and there is no hope beyond this life. So if you take God out of the picture, I'm actually not surprised that people are pushing for a change in the law. I don't think it's right, but I'm not surprised at it.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I just a step back, perhaps at this point, in terms of the options that are available within the sphere of palliative care, what does that cover? How effective, I suppose, I'm saying, are the means of looking after people at making them feel life is worth living?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And actually, I think what I would say initially is that palliative care itself is provided by lots of different people. So any doctor you encounter should be trained to provide some level of palliative care. All GPs can, and district nurses will be involved. But at my end of the specialist spectrum, I am one of a team of doctors, nurse specialists, other healthcare professionals, ranging from physios through to psychotherapists, through to bereavement care. And we provide what we would call a holistic care model. So we care for the whole patient. So not just the pain, although I think we're good at managing that, and the other physical symptoms, but the whole patient in their whole context. So actually, palliative care covers hospital, community, hospice, and actually we are there to support with those complex symptoms and to help and support people as they approach the end of their life. How effective are we? I think that we are very effective in managing those symptoms. Actually, we can do a lot with medication, with talking therapies, with time to manage those symptoms, or indeed the fear of those symptoms that people might have. And actually, I think as the alternative, good quality palliative care is the way forward, is actually the way to alleviate most of the suffering and distress that these people feel.
Thank you. I mean, Mark, you are a Christian, and so you're going to be coloured inevitably in your approach to these issues and to your work by being a Christian. You have clear convictions. Is there one particular biblical insight that particularly sort of stands in your mind as you approach your work?
I mean, there are many, obviously, biblical principles. I think if I were asked for one, I'd probably take it right back to the beginning, right back to what got me into medicine and specifically into palliative care. And that is thinking right at the beginning of the Bible, God creates men and women in his image, and he creates us with untold worth and with value. And it doesn't matter whether that person is right at the very beginning of their life, right in the middle of their life, in what the world sees as their prime, or as I deal with towards the end of their life. Every person, because they're made in the image of God, is a masterpiece, is a wonderful creation of God's, and has untold value. And so that is what drives me to provide the best care I can to all my patients, however old, whatever diagnosis they've got. They're all valuable. They're all wonderfully and fearfully made in God's image.
Oh, thank you. Well, look, I hope that if I end up in the care of somebody close to you, it's you looking after me. It's lovely to hear you speak like that. I want to ask you one more thing, though. You were sharing with me that on a pretty much a daily basis, you encounter people who are feeling, do you know what? Either I just want to die, or I would want to die if my condition deteriorated further than this. Well, can you just say how some of those conversations finish? Where do they go?
I mean, I think, as I've said earlier, palliative care is the archetypal holistic care, the whole patient. So a lot of my conversation, agreeably, is around managing symptoms. And a lot of that is the physical. But tied up with the physical symptoms are those emotional and social and spiritual aspects of the patient. And so one of the great joys of my job is that I'm able to, indeed, I'm encouraged to talk to patients about faith, about religion, about their thoughts about death and about dying, about what it means to them. And so some of those conversations really stick in my head. I have conversations with Christians where they really encourage me in their lack of fear about death because they know they're going to be with Jesus. I have conversations with other people where they actually ask me what I think, and I'm able to share my beliefs with them. And I have others where I am able to talk with them about those fears and concerns. And a little bit of my Christian ethos can come through when doing that. But equally, I have chaplaincy support who are even more than me allowed to talk to them about those things. So actually, a lot of what I do is around the physical. But I have this great aspect of my job, which is talking to patients about faith, about religion, and having that one-to-one, person-to-person contact is a great joy, a great privilege, but it's also a great challenge that we take that up and continue ministering in that situation.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your input.
Of what palliative care has to offer, and I think one of the wonderful things about dying well is that actually it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for focusing on the things which really matter, for saying sorry, for being reconciled where there are terribly broken relationships, for receiving forgiveness for things that have haunted us all our lives, for fulfilling dreams, for relinquishing tasks, for learning new lessons, for encouraging the next generation, and for preparing to meet my Maker and my Redeemer. And so I have seen how dying can be transformed into actually the most astonishingly wonderful thing. And I'm so passionate about this. I wrote a book called Dying Well. If you're interested in that, or you know somebody who might be facing death, or you're trying to support someone who's coming to the end of their life, you might find that a helpful resource. There are some other books that are available and also material on my website. I think as I come to the end, I just want to say that this above all is a spiritual battle. Yes, there's a place for lobbying Parliament and providing resources and so on. But what we know in the scriptures is that the evil one is a murderer. This debate is all about killing. It's all about the destruction of precious lives made in God's image. And he's a liar. He's the father of lies. And this is a battle about truth, about manipulation of language. And in a spiritual battle, it's prayer that is essential. And those of us who are involved in this as Christians, we're very aware of the spiritual oppression there is in this whole area, and that this is like the evil one's territory. So if you're a Christian, will you pray? Will you pray for the doctors working in this field? Like Dr. Banting, will you pray for those who are trying to provide resources like myself and the many people I work with? And will you pray that we will be witnesses and that the evil one's plan to bring a sort of further plague of killing through the health world would not come to fruition? But just to close by this wonderful verse, it's one of my favorite verses in the entire scripture. You know, in secular thinking, the way that secular thinking, including medics, think about life is that it starts from nowhere, it develops and develops, it gets stronger and stronger, and you're learning new things, and your brain is getting better, and everything's getting better and better, and then you hit 25. And from that time onwards, you're on the long, slow way down. And bit by bit, your cells are dying, you're losing brain cells, DNA fragments are accumulating. And to begin with, you can't really see the damage. It's all just happening internally at a cellular level. But bit by bit, the wreckage accumulates, and then your hair's going grey, and your skin's going flabby, and all the rest. And eventually, the wreckage gets worse and worse, and then you die. And that's it. That's life. Welcome. But actually, in Christian thinking, the path of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, which grows into the everlasting day. And the image is of you traveling through the night, and it's dark, and it goes on and on and on, and you think, is this night ever going to end? And then out there on the horizon, you see that first blush, and you know the day is coming. Second by second, minute by minute, nothing can hold it back. The day is coming. And that's the image, and that's how we are to live. We are to live in the darkness, but with our eyes fixed on the horizon to see the first gleam of dawn, because it's coming. That's the Christian hope. That's the way we are to live, and that's the way we are to communicate to this world, which is paralyzed by the fear of death. So, as I said, there are some books if you're interested in taking it further, and other resources there, and I have a website there, johnwyatt.com, so you can get many resources there as well. Let's have a word of prayer. The path of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn that grows into the everlasting day. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wonderful hope that we can have of seeing you face to face, of receiving new bodies, that death is not the end, but is actually a gateway to a far more wonderful existence. We pray that through the Spirit you would burn this hope into our lives, into our hearts. And we pray that you'd help us to be witnesses to you in this dangerous and sad and difficult world in which you've called us to live. In the name of the Lord Jesus, amen.